Welcome to Understand All. I'm your host, Aslekeir Gairleif, and today we're embarking on a fascinating journey into the world of economics as we explore the Gini coefficient, a powerful tool for measuring income inequality. So, buckle up and get ready to dive deep into this intriguing topic. Have you ever wondered how we can quantify the disparity between the rich and the poor? Well, that's where the Gini coefficient comes in. Developed by Italian statistician Corrado Gini back in 1912, this little mathematical marvel has become the go-to measure for economists and policymakers alike. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of how it works, let's take a step back and understand why the Gini coefficient is so important. You see, income inequality isn't just some abstract concept. It has real-world consequences that affect us all. According to a study by the International Monetary Fund, high levels of inequality can actually hinder economic growth and lead to social unrest. Now I know what you might be thinking. Aslekeir, this all sounds a bit heavy for a podcast. But trust me, understanding the Gini coefficient is crucial if we want to make sense of the world around us. Plus, I promise to keep things engaging and throw in a joke or two along the way. So, let's get down to business. The Gini coefficient is based on something called the Lorenz curve, which is essentially a graphical representation of income distribution. Imagine a world where everyone earns exactly the same amount. In this utopian scenario, the Lorenz curve would be a straight line, and the Gini coefficient would be 0. Now picture the opposite extreme, where one person hoards all the wealth and everyone else is left with nothing. Here, the Gini coefficient would be a whopping 1. In reality, most countries fall somewhere between these two extremes. The global average Gini coefficient is around 0.38, according to the World Bank. But there's a wide range out there. South Africa, for example, has one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world at 0.63, reflecting a staggering level of inequality. On the other hand, countries like Slovenia and Slovakia boast much lower values, hovering around 0.24. But how do we actually calculate the Gini coefficient? Well, it involves a bit of mathematical wizardry. Essentially, we take the area between the Lorenz curve and the line of perfect equality and divide it by the total area under that line. Don't worry if that sounds like gibberish. The key takeaway is that the higher the Gini coefficient, the greater the level of inequality. Now, you might be wondering, why should I care about some obscure statistical measure? Well, let me tell you, the Gini coefficient has far-reaching implications. It's not just a number that economists toss around to sound smart at dinner parties. Policymakers use it to assess the effectiveness of initiatives aimed at reducing inequality, and researchers rely on it to study the links between inequality and a host of social issues, from health outcomes to crime rates. But the Gini coefficient isn't without its limitations. For one, it doesn't capture the full picture of inequality. It doesn't tell us anything about the distribution of wealth, for example, or the opportunities available to different segments of society. That's why economists often use the Gini coefficient in conjunction with other measures, like the Palma ratio or the Thiel index, to paint a more comprehensive picture. Despite its shortcomings, the Gini coefficient remains an invaluable tool for understanding inequality. And in a world where the gap between the haves and the have-nots seems to be widening by the day, that understanding is more important than ever. A 2020 report by Oxfam found that the world's billionaires have more wealth than 4.6 billion people combined. Let that sink in for a moment. But it's not all doom and gloom. Armed with the knowledge of the Gini coefficient and its implications, we can work towards a more equitable future. We can advocate for policies that promote fairness and opportunity, and we can strive to create a world where everyone has a chance to thrive, regardless of their background. So the next time you hear someone mention the Gini coefficient, don't just nod along pretending to understand. Impress them with your newfound knowledge. Explain how it works, why it matters, and what we can do to build a more just society. And if all else fails, just tell them you learned about it on the Understand All podcast. That's sure to earn you some street cred. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with a final thought. The Gini coefficient may be a complex and imperfect measure, but it's a vital tool in the fight against inequality. By understanding its strengths and limitations, we can work towards a world where everyone has a fair shot at success. So let's keep the conversation going, and let's strive to create a more just and equitable future for all. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the Gini coefficient. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button and share it with your friends. And as always, stay curious, keep learning, and never stop asking questions. Until next time, this is Aslekeir Gairleif signing off.